Hi, welcome to Dialogue with Deidre. I'm your host, Deidre Malone. I'm the president and CEO of the Carter Malone Group, and we're located here in Memphis, Tennessee. We've been on hiatus with the M1 TV network for about a year now, and it's been due to COVID, but we're just so glad to be back on the air. And we're launching again in Black History Month, and my guest today is so amazing. I've had an opportunity to get to know this guest for over a year now, and she's an amazing woman. And I wanted to come back with Dialogue with Deidre in a big way. And so that's how we're doing it. My guest today is someone that I admire and have worked with, like I said, for over a year now, Gloria Browne-Marshall. She's an attorney. She's a playwright. She's a college professor. And she is also an author, and we're going to talk about a little bit of all of those things today. But you can also see Gloria on national and international news. I mean, they call her all the time. When there's a legal hot topic, you may see Gloria on CNN, MSNBC, or on TV in Paris. I mean, some of everywhere. Gloria, welcome to Dialogue with Deidre.
Thank you.
It is Black History Month, and I wanted to start our conversation off with talking about She Took Justice, the Black woman, and I see it's behind you, Law, Power, and from 1619 to 1969. Most people have heard about Ida B. Wells, Shirley Chisholm, and some others, Sojourner Truth, but what was the impetus for you to write this book?
Well, first and foremost, I was working on a previous book, Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to present. And while I was working on that book, my race law book, I saw all of these amazing Black women's stories. And I work with true cases. So these are all true stories. And so I said, when I finish this book, I'm going to go write this book about Black women. And then another book came up and another play, and I kept putting off, and I was always collecting the true legal stories, because what we need to understand about law is that you write it down. And that means that even in the 1600s, the 1700s, they were writing down the law cases. So I said, you know what? I've got to tell these women's stories. These are true stories, and no one's going to believe Black women were doing these things in the 1600s, 1700s, all the way up to the Civil Rights Movement. There are many Black women who are part of the Civil Rights Movement who have amazing stories we don't know about. So I decided that I would write this book. So it goes from Queen and Zynga in Angola, Africa, all the way up to the Civil Rights Movement.
Well, I love it. I mean, when I read the book, yes, I read the book, and I thought about it. I said, look, we were queens back then, and we still are. Okay, let's just be real. We still are queens. But just to understand the history and the struggles that these women in the books, in your book, have gone through, it's just amazing. What would you like the readers to know? Is there like 2 or 3 stories out of the book that really just kind of touched you as you were writing She Took Justice?
Well, first and foremost, Queen and Zynga. I mean, she is amazing. She lived during a time period of the 1500s of 1583. She was a diplomat. She was a warrior. She used to watch her father, the king, as he navigated the egos and power struggles among African tribes. They've said that, his land in Dongo could have been as large as New York State and New Jersey together. And we still have kings and queens today. So there are still kings and queens in Africa who are in the lineage of many of these African kings and queens from that time period. But Queen Nzinga not only fought against the Portuguese, who were the first to come to enslave Africans, she tried to stop the slave trade. She negotiated a peace treaty with the Portuguese in 1622. Her story is amazing, that they wanted her to sit on the floor while they negotiated the peace treaty with her country. And she said no. And she clapped her hands, and her maidservants came and knelt down and gave their backs to her to use as a chair as she negotiated the peace treaty. These are the type of women we're talking about. I mean, Mum Bet, who in the 1700s walked by hearing them talk about, you know, their breakaway from England and how everybody should have rights. And so she went to a lawyer and sued her slave mistress, who had been beating her and her sister, for her freedom, and won her case.
That's amazing. That is,
there's so many of these cases.
But that's not what we're taught in school. I mean, and so that's what's so amazing about your book, that our hope is that a lot of colleges pick this up. High school students need to pick this up, because this is a lot of history specifically wrapped around the law that we're just not taught, and we don't know.
We don't know, and we're not supposed to know, because they're women, because they're women of color, because they also show their own agency, and they would not step back. I mean, they had everything to lose, including their lives, and some of them did. We have Celia, for example, in the 1850s in Missouri, who fought against her slave master, killed him, and hid the body, and was tried because he had been raping her, forcing her to have children since she was 14 years old. And so she said, enough is enough. I can't take it anymore. Stop this. And so they ended up, of course, taking her life by a jury. And this is the other thing that's interesting about these cases. Many of them involve slave courts. And we don't know anything about these slave courts, but yeah, they would have slave courts, not regular courts many times, but slave courts. But even when they allowed a Black person into a regular court as a defendant, they weren't allowed to testify on their own behalf. So Celia could not testify as to the rapes that were taking place. And we can also look at what was happening then that we have as vestiges for today.
Yes.
And that's one big one, is you're just supposed to be abused and take it.
Right.
A person of color is just supposed to be abused by the system, abused by the Karens of the world, abused by the lynch mobs and January 6 mobs of the world. They're just supposed to be abused as women, and you're supposed to remain silent. And these women did not remain silent centuries ago. And I think that's the other thing that would give women and other people who are being oppressed courage to know, if they stood up for themselves centuries ago, you can stand up for yourself now, even if it's not guaranteed that you'll be successful.
Gloria, as I read your book and as I read 1619, I think about the law, and I think about how it's changed some, but still there are vestiges of those old laws that still affect people of color today. It's absolutely amazing.
Especially in the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Because when you find out that it was in 1669 in the Virginia colony that a law was passed that said that a European could kill an African and there would be no charges of felony against that European. That was 1669. So they were killing Africans, they were killing Native Americans with impunity in the 1600s. And so I look at history and the vestiges of history as something like a song, a dance. You know the words to it. It might be out of step, but you still play the same song and you still like that same rhythm. And so we're still dancing to a song that might have ended by law years ago, but it's the song we know, it's the song we hum, it's the dance step we continue to use. And unfortunately, vestiges will continue until we then bring to light the fact that you're dancing to a tune that is detrimental to many people that you could have learned in your youth. But now you must let it go because it no longer fits in a civilized world. It didn't fit back then. And there were always whites who stood up. It has to be known. There were always white people who stood up for what was right, even back then. I think the problem that we have is too many people are silent. As Martin Luther King said, it's the silence of the good people that causes a lot of these problems to continue.
Well, and then it's not just white people, it's African Americans are silent when a lot of these laws are affecting us. So in your opinion, what are those things that we should be doing to speak up and speak out?
Well, for one, if your elected official is not speaking up and speaking out, then they need to be at home doing what they're doing without a job in political office. And that's the power we have. What these women, and she took justice, understood that even if they were enslaved, they had power.
Right.
And if when we're convinced, it doesn't matter how many degrees from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of Chicago, or wherever, Vanderbilt, you may have, if you feel you're powerless, then you're not going to do anything with that education. You're not going to do anything if you're in a political seat and you still feel you have no power. If you're a lawyer, and I've talked to lawyers and who say, well, there's nothing I can do. It's like, my goodness, if you have a law degree and you know how to navigate the system and you still feel this helpless, then it's not about the outside power, it's about the mind. And it's always been said, if you can control a person's mind, then you don't have to worry about them at all. They will always follow and feel lesser than. So even when segregation ended, there were still people who were carrying the vestiges of feeling second to other people. And so I think these women, in reading their stories, should make people say, and I'm talking about across the board, men and women, say, wow, why am I not using the power I have? The question has been asked many times, and I remember asking it years ago. How is it they could do so much more back then than we're doing now, when they had so much less? But what they had was courage.
Right.
Courage. And courage doesn't mean that people just do, things and they don't feel any fear. Courage means doing something in spite or despite of the fear. So that if you know this is what you believe in, that you have to stand up and go forward. Your heart might be racing. It's hard to catch your breath. You're not sure of the consequence, and you've thought it through. It's not like blindly done, but you have a sense that I'm an underdog here. But how do you live with yourself? And there's a lot of stress that we have in our lives today is because we allow ourselves to be rolled over and live with the regrets of not speaking out for ourselves and for others. Because if they're talking about someone else of another religion or ethnic group or race in your presence, then when you leave, they're probably going to be talking about you too. And if they do it against them, they'll come rolling in, because once power starts rolling, it doesn't stop and say, oh yes, you're my friend, I'm not going to bother you. Power will roll over anybody who stands there and is weak and appears weak by keeping their mouths closed.
So I can tell you, Gloria, as a former elected official, you are absolutely right. If you are put in a position of power where people have elected you, you have a right. And because they put you in office to speak up and speak out. And I can tell you, having been, like I'm sure you have been before, the only African American in a space, it's your responsibility to represent. I remember working for a company one time and was out to dinner with a group of my colleagues, and I was the only African American there. And I remember someone saying, oh, the neighborhood we're in, it's just such a ghetto. And, I'm just afraid of the people. I'm like, ghetto? What do you mean? And I mean, but I had to say it and I had to speak out. And in that instance, people saw me not just as a colleague, but as an African-American female that was just not going to let them run over me, but I was going to have a voice and speak up for my people at that time. So, but what I want you to do is tell people, because I don't want to give away too much of this incredible book. We want people to buy it. It is a good book for any age, adults, high school students, college students. And if you are interested in law, not just the law, but anybody should buy this book because it's a great book. How can we get our hands on that book, Gloria?
Well, the usual suspects out there, like Amazon, etc., Barnes and Noble. But I'm going to give you a little secret. There is a discount code. Okay, so you can tell your viewers about this discount code. If you go to the Routledge is the publisher. If you go to the Routledge website and you put in the discount code F as in Frank, L as in Larry, R as in Richard, FLR40, you can get 20% off.
Oh yeah, FLR40, and go to the Routledge website and you can get 40% off.
20% off.
20%. 20% off.
Everything.
You got to make a little money. 20% off.
Yes.
Okay. So Gloria, you are a playwright, and of course, we've been involved and worked with you on Dreams of Emmett Till, and it's just so profound this. And I'm going to tell people where they can go see it. If they haven't seen it, they can go to the website dreamsofemmett-play.com to view the play, the virtual play. But what made you decide to want to write this play?
I've been a playwright before I was a lawyer. I was a writer, and I've always been a writer. And so that's why I don't need to write books to keep my job. I write books because I enjoy being a writer and writing them. I don't enjoy the process, but I enjoy I enjoy having written the book once it's finished. And Dreams of Emmett Till was actually, as a playwright, it came to me during the time period of George Floyd. It was already on my mind when I thought about Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and so many people who had been murdered. And I wanted to go into the heads of the murderers. What were they thinking? And so when I think about Emmett Till and the murder of this boy who had just turned 14, some people refer to him as a man. He was not a man. He had just turned 14 the month before. So we're really talking about a 13-year-old who was brutally murdered, beaten to death, shot in the head, brutalized in so many ways, bodies tossed in the Tallahatchie River. And the brilliant series that was done by ABC is just amazing.
Yes.
And I was a part of that series as well. Let Them See as one of the documentary interviewees. But I always thought about how his death changed so many people for so many generations, and it changed me. It really made me say, we've got to talk about this. We've got to talk about not just the brutalization of Black lives, but also the mindset of those white people who feel the need to brutalize, to maintain through violence a way of living that they feel is being lost, and where they have white superiority that was unearned in the first place. White superiority is based in violence.
Yes.
And that's what the Emmett Till play says to me, the story, the facts of it, that people wanted to stay in a position of superiority by law and violence, and continues to be so to this day. And so the voice of Emmett Till came to me, the voice of Carolyn Bryant,
Yes,
the voice I heard in my head as a playwright. And so I had brilliant actors, and my director, Bobby
Fields, yes.
Yeah,
amazing.
So that I had to say it because it haunted me. And as it haunted me as an activist, it haunted me as a playwright, and I had to put it on paper. And I was so blessed during the middle of the pandemic to have this play on Zoom and have it recorded with production values by wonderful professional actors, and and have it win film festivals. And so it won the American Film Award. So I was just having to compete against my little Dreams of Emmett Till, compete against real films, was just an amazing feeling to know that other people appreciated the work.
Well, and it's as you mentioned, it's just gained in accolades because it's won so many awards. But that's not the only virtual play that's won awards. Shot Caught a Soul is amazing, and that's the first one I had an opportunity to see, and it brought home the mother of two sons, just thinking about them out there at night and praying for them that they'd get home at night. Shot Caught a Soul is just an amazing virtual play that you wrote, Gloria. And what was the impetus behind that writing?
That was Michael Brown.
Okay.
My brother's name is Michael. I grew up in the Midwest. When I saw Michael Brown's body lying in that sun in the street in Ferguson, Missouri, I knew how hot it gets in the summer in the Midwest. And it was just there. And I said, I can't. I was on CNN and MSNBC, talking to these different media sources in print. And I said, this is not enough. The artistic, creative side of me was screaming out. And that's why I say to people, don't let this rest on your soul so that you feel that you're sinking down into a depression. Act. You know, do something, because you don't want that to make you into a vicious, mean person. You don't want it to depress you, to weigh you down. So I said, I've got to get this out of me, these feelings of vulnerability. I need to explore it through a play. And so Shot Caught a Soul is a story of this little 16-year-old teenager, high school student, you know, bebopping around, visiting his aunt out in the suburbs, encounters a white police officer who's trying to protect his neighborhood in his mind. An encounter takes place that no one sees, which is so often the case when there's a police encounter with a civilian. No one sees what happens, and then one person is left to tell the story. But in Shot Caught a Soul, I said, but what if that victim could tell his story as well? So in Shot, that soul that who gets to tell his story is that teen. And that officer has now been haunted by the teen's voice. And both of these, you know, Dreams of Emmett Till and Shot Caught a Soul, I want to see them on a live stage. I want to see them in theaters. So I want to take it's like I'm doing it quite the opposite. Usually a play is in a theater and then it's filmed and then you see the film. I did the opposite because of the COVID pandemic. It's filmed first and now it's time for it to be before a live audience in a theater. So I hope that you have theater goers who will say yes to their theaters and their subscription holders to a theater. Say, I want these plays in my theater. I want people who are in theater to ask their artistic directors and others to say, you know, there's this play I want. And then I'm so honored. Shot Caught a Soul was actually published. And so now the publication of Shot as a play is available for theaters to do as well.
Well, so we need to make sure, Gloria, that as a part of this, we let our viewers know, because I know I'm going to talk to Hattie Lou Theater and Blue City Cultural Center about obtaining access to these plays. So maybe specifically they can have them in their theaters. But what would a theater need to do in order to get access to these plays?
Well, for Shot Caught a Soul, and these are all, both Shot and Dreams of Emmett Till are short plays. They can be brought together in a night of theater so that it would be one full-length play, and then afterwards have community interaction with people on stage. This is what we've done in the past when we've had films. We've had it kind of like a town hall. After each production, you could have someone talk about these issues of racial justice. It gives a point of entree to have these communications. And so TRW .com is the name of the play theater publication, trw.com. And so once they see the play, for example, Shot Caught a Soul, at the end you could see TRW is where they could contact them to get the play itself, or you can go on TRW website, you know, and look for them as a publishing house of plays, and you can read the play there. So it does have some little spicy words in it. Let you know, we try to keep it real, but it's not gratuitous. And I also want people to know, if you really are sincere about having conversations around these issues, let's not just, everybody has some issue around race and their experience. If you have something like these plays, and I've taught race in the law for 20 years, if you have something like this play, afterwards, when you have a discussion, you're discussing the play and what's in the play, as opposed to discussing personalities and personal experiences causing conflicts between people. You can look at this objectively and say, this is what I got out of the play. This is what I think about what was in the play. So you're not fighting against each other. You're not discussing it based on a personal experience alone. You have a point of departure. And that's why I really want these plays to be in theaters, in colleges, in high schools, so that they can be used as an educational tool for adults as well as the students.
And Gloria, I would be remiss if I didn't mention another screenplay that you have, Sergeant Freeman. Just briefly share with our viewers a little bit about Sergeant Freeman as well.
I started writing Sergeant Freeman, as the protagonist is an African-American single mother of a daughter who goes missing. and she finds later this daughter's being held in a rural community that's been taken over by these white supremacists. And so when I first wrote it, they said, this is impossible. There are no, white supremacists aren't doing this. There are not that many of them. Now, I worked at Southern Poverty Law Center, as you pointed out, and,
Right.
and I know that the Klan Watch and other types of entities within Southern Poverty Law Center are there to give monthly and sometimes daily reports on white supremacist activity. That's when I saw so many white supremacist organizations in the North. It's always assumed they're only in the South, but they're in
Right.
the North. And so my screenplay is set in Pennsylvania because, and then the other thing I found out, of course, now that these white supremacists have taken over these small towns that have lost their economic base. And so they're struggling and they're looking for anyone who's going to come in to help them. That the ages now have gotten older. The young people have left for other jobs, and these towns become vulnerable to these white supremacists who then invade the town and take over the power structure. And so sundown towns still exist from before, where people of color had to be out of the town before sunset. But now we have a new type of sundown town that are towns that are being controlled by white supremacists, and this is happening in the North as well as the South. And so all these things I wrote about that they said were impossible after January 6th, which is what a lynch mob looked like. That's what a pogrom looked like. And so when we know that January 6th exists, we know the people didn't come from one place. They came from around the country, and they were in positions of power. And so my screenplay, Sergeant Freeman, is about Sergeant Freeman fighting against that power to save her daughter.
Amazing. I can't wait until that's a virtual play or in theaters.
I can't wait to see it. It's going to be a full-length movie. I have decided, I have the vision for it. I want everybody to say, yes, it's going to be a full-length movie. I'm looking forward to eating the popcorn inside the theater with or without a mask and watching Sergeant Freeman on the big screen.
Well, Gloria, if anybody can make it happen, I know you can.
With your help.
And I'm all in. We are, Carter Malone's all in. We love you. Anything we can do, we're going to do to make it happen. Two last topics, and then I'm going to let you go. As Justice Breyer announced that he is stepping down as a part of candidate Biden's promise to the African-American community, he committed to putting an African-American female on the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts around that? It sounds like he's going to make every attempt, the president's going to make every attempt to make that a reality. And there are 3 women that have been shortlisted. What are your thoughts around this whole process of the appointment and the 3 women that are the lead? There might be others that are mentioned, but 3 that are shortlisted at this time.
One that candidate Joe Biden made a lot of promises about a lot of things. He made promises around voting rights. He made promises around criminal justice, promises about climate change, and of course, promises around the COVID pandemic. And so politicians make promises. And so when he came into office and he was asked about this particular promise of making sure that a Black woman would be a nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court, I think he put himself in a box by saying, yes, there'll be a Black woman nominated to the Supreme Court. But I think the box is one that is a political box, and it's not a box that should be harmful to the Black woman who's the nominee. And I say it this way: Donald Trump did not even want to know who was the best qualified for the court. He wanted to have a list vetted by the most conservative legal organization, the Federalist Society, that would then be people who would be loyal to him in particular, which is something that's antithetical to the ideals of the U.S. Supreme Court being a neutral body, but also that they had to be conservatives and they had to have a conservative record on abortion and many other issues. Now, this is what he asked for. this was the political landscape that we now have Joe Biden in as a candidate. So I think these women have extraordinary credentials.
Yes.
I don't think that there's a problem given the fact that Ronald Reagan said he wanted to nominate a woman to the high court, and he nominated Sandra Day O'Connor.
That's right.
You know, so he then forecasted that's what he was going to do. He was going to put a woman before the court. And so this is not something that hasn't been done in the past, but it involves a Black woman. And these nasty comments about, oh, she's an affirmative action hire and she's going to be adjudicating affirmative action cases. Actually, you know, we don't know what type of affirmative action she may or may not have been a part of. And we also know that her credentials are, any of these people have stellar credentials. And we also know this last part, which is this country would be glad to have an African woman of this stature on the high court. It was 1872 that we had our first Black female lawyer. 1872. That was only 3 years after the first white female lawyer. It was 1939 we had our first judge who was African American female. And it was in the 1960s we had our first Black female judge who ascended to the federal bench. So this is a natural progression of things that had been stopped because people overlooked Black women. And now that overlooking has to come to an end because we have stellar candidates and the position is there and available and should be one in which we all support her for the job.
I'm looking forward to it. And I'm hoping that Congress can move forward with the nomination pretty quickly. As you mentioned, the former President Trump moved really fast on his nominations and got them in. So I'm hoping our Congress can move pretty fast on this. Last topic, Gloria, critical race theory. I've never seen anything like this. It's like a wildfire across this country, where state legislatures are creating laws to ban history, specifically around African American people of color. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is another part of maintaining white superiority, and that, you know, for much of this nation's history, I'll say up until about 15 years ago, probably 10, people of color were not supposed to complain about being oppressed. It was thought that white people don't want to see an unhappy Negro. So you're supposed to walk by the hanging lynch bodies, go into work as a maid, and not say a single mumbling word. This was the expectation throughout this country. And so how dare we actually show the diabolical actions of white America against people of color, because white people don't want to own their legacy of diabolical actions against people of color, Native Americans, African Americans, Asians, and Latinx. They don't want to own it. And one way to not own it is to pretend like it doesn't exist. So we've finally gotten ourselves as people of color and other white people who have decided to be about justice and not about just maintaining white superiority. We've finally gotten to a point where we can have a national stage to have these discussions. We've gotten a critical mass where we can speak about these in a classroom, and that's the backlash of white superiority, people lingering dinosaurs from another time period, and the babies of those dinosaurs who want to maintain their heritage of white superiority, of pretending that they are God's gifts to the world and believing their own hype, that they have not done the demonic things they have done to people over hundreds of years. And then on top of it, as we have death threats and bomb threats to HBCUs, this continuation, we have the murders of Black people in cold blood. And then we say, oh, we're not supposed to say anything about it because it hurts our feelings to know our history and our present. Right. And so my thing is, then why don't you just stop doing it? Because if the past is the past, it's already been done. Those were your ancestors. And for those people who migrated into the country, you migrated into a country with a lot of faults, but you wanted to come here for economic opportunities or educational opportunities. So you have to buy the country itself. You can't come in and buy it piecemeal, the parts you want, and leave the rest behind. If you immigrate into this country, immigrate into the whole country, not just the time frame in which you arrived here. So these critical issues of race must be part of, and because we never had it, a truth and reconciliation that this country must come to. And trying to hide from it, is still going to rise up, and it's still going to speak. And the plays that I write and the play that I'm working on right now, is one that the truth is still going to rise up to the younger generations, because we're finding out it was young people who may be behind those bomb threats to the HBCUs. It was Dylan Roof, who was 19 years old. It was Kyle Rittenhouse, who was 16, 17 years old. These are young people taking on the hate of their earlier generations. So this hate is not going anywhere, and the diabolical mindset is not leaving until we face it and stop trying to inculcate more young white people into a hate manifestation that then buoys white superiority to a point where they believe that no matter what they've done in the past or the present, it's still good. And it's not. And that's what they don't want anybody to say, that they're not the precious beings that they want to claim they are.
Gloria, that's the reason we need writers and playwrights and attorneys like yourself to keep doing what you're doing to educate us. And I was sharing with someone, I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this exact subject. And I said to them, that's the reason African-American media is so important. My show, the Tri-State Defender, an African-American newspaper that I'm involved in, these platforms are so important, because if a state legislature can tell educators what they can and cannot teach and charge them if they make an attempt to teach it, something is definitely wrong in our country. So our voices matter. And Gloria, I just want to thank you for doing all that you are doing to elevate the conversation through your writing, through your books, through your teaching, through your plays. And I want to invite my guests to make sure that they keep up with what you're doing by following you on Facebook, author Gloria Brown with the E, Marshall, on Instagram, G Brown Marshall, and on Twitter at G Brown Marshall. Please, please go like her social media platforms so you can keep up with what Gloria has going on, because she's got a lot going on. And Gloria, thank you so much for being on Dialogue with Deidre. What a way for me to come back.
Thank you so much. We're all people just trying to make it in the world. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work, and God bless.
God bless. Thank you, Gloria. Take care.